it's Jill, and today I want to answer a question that I swear I get asked once a week minimum in email or on Facebook or various places. And that is, what is the difference between thread and Fireline, and why would I use one over the other? It's a very common question, and the answer is not simple. Surprisingly enough. There's positives and negatives to both types of thread. I'm just going to use thread as an overall term. But a nylon-based thread like 1G or KO or Nozu Sunoku or any, there's a Miyuki beading thread. All those are nylon-based threads that are more like an actual sewing thread. Versus Fireline is actually a fishing line, and it is made of completely different things. And so there's positives and negatives for both of them. So let me kind of give you the rundown on both of them and what projects would, why I would go use one on one type of project rather than the other. So let me talk about thread first. So they're usually nylon based. They will likely, not always, have some stretch in them, meaning that they will stretch out a little bit over time. So with a nylon-based thread, you usually want to pre-stretch your thread, which literally just means taking the length of thread that you're going to work with and pulling it apart and kind of giving it a bounce, trying to get out any amount that thread will stretch out over time. You're trying to get that out ahead of using it. There are some threads that are considered pre-stretched that you do not have to do stretching for. I'm not going to run down each individual type of thread in this particular video. There are other videos for that. And in addition, I haven't even used all the threads out there. So, when you're looking for a thread, read the marketing material, see what benefits it states are for that particular thread. And that will help you choose a thread, okay? But in general, you've got the stretching issue with a nylon-based thread. You may need to wax it. A thread like this is going to knot more easily. Part of the reason is because it is more supple. It has more drape to it. Basically, it's more floppy, a thread, and that makes it easier for it to knot in on itself. So waxing it can make a thread like that be a little bit stronger, and it can also help prevent some of those tangles. Thread comes in a nice large variety of colors. So in this particular case, this happens to be 12 of the 1G colors that 1G comes in. I think 1G has like 30 colors, maybe not quite that many, but a lot of colors. These are just 4 of, I think, probably about 12 or 14 colors that KO thread comes in. What else? I've got Nozu Sunoku thread. I'm not sure how many colors, but anyway, you get a broader color range than you do with something like Fireline. With thread, you've got generally 3 sizes that you'll see out there. D thread is the one that I recommend. It's the thickest. You've got B thread, which can also work, but I wouldn't use it if with something that's heavy, because it will break more easily than a D thread. And then you'll see sometimes people call it a double aught or a double zero. That is a very thin thread, and unless you're going to use that with multiple passes, I do not recommend using it at all. I don't think I even own any. That's just not something that I particularly would ever use. With long-term durability on thread, one of the things with thread is that it can degrade in certain conditions. So one of the conditions that it can degrade in is, for instance, you're wearing a bracelet, you go to wash your hands and your bracelet gets wet. The thread inside those beads takes a really long time to dry out. And so that long-term water exposure inside those beads can cause the thread to degrade more quickly over time. It's a subtle thing. It's not like it's even gonna happen in a couple of years. It's like over, a long lifespan of a bracelet. But it's just something to be aware of, is that it is not waterproof. Okay, so then let's talk about the Fireline. Fireline was not made for beaders. It's made for the fishing industry. We just happened to co-opt it. So it's a very strong thread. It is stronger than a nylon-based thread. It is what's called thermally bonded. So it's a bunch of polymer strands that are either braided or twisted together and then thermally bonded, meaning that they've heated it and it's done kind of a partial melt together to create a single strand of multiple strands together. And that's one of the things that makes it a lot stronger, is it's got all those multiple strands inside the core there. It comes in different weights and diameters. We have got more options than just the D, the B, and the double aught. In Fireline, it comes in everything from 2 pound to, I don't even know how high up it goes. 10 pound is about the highest that I go for. I usually use a 6 pound weight or a 4 pound weight. A 6 pound weight is roughly the equivalent of a size D thread, and a 4 pound weight is roughly the equivalent of a size B thread. Different sizes have different diameters in the Fireline. So, these different pound weights have different diameters. So that's something else to be paying attention to. So for instance, this 10 pound that I have in my hand right now has a 0.008 diameter, where a 6 pound has a 0.006 diameter. So that can come into play if you're having to pass through beads multiple times. But basically, I think you're safe using a 4 pound or a 6 pound as just your everyday go-to Fireline. For me, I generally use the 6 pound, but I have more recently been using 4 pound also. So it is waterproof because, of course, it's fishing line. It was meant to be used in the water. One of the downsides of Fireline is that we are limited in colors. So it comes in kind of a smoky color. It comes in what they call crystal, but is actually white. And then there's also a green color that actually I don't even own, but I hear other people talk about, and they say that it's very, it blends in with a surprising number of colors. But that is one of the limitations, is that we don't have the color options that you do in a thread. With the smoke Fireline, it has a coating on the outside. It's a graphite type coating that will come off on your hands a little bit. So if that bothers you, I kind of call seeing somebody with the smoke coating kind of ground into their fingertips, I call that like the beater's handshake. Like that's an identifying mark. Oh, you're a beater. You've got the graphite on your fingers. You can always wipe that off with a tissue, or I just take a little wet, damp paper towel and wipe off my length of thread before I use it. And that takes care of 95% of that coating. I want to bring you in here a little closer, because I do want to show you kind of the difference in this whole drape situation and what I'm talking about with that, because that brings me into talking about why you would use one kind of material over another. So the biggest reason to use a nylon-based thread is because you want it to hang really nicely. And the number one thing right now that's trendy is fringe earrings. And when you want those fringes to hang nice and softly, there we go. Come on off. Fine, the whole label can come off, see if I care. Okay, when you want those fringes to hang nicely on an earring, I'm going to kind of tug on this and make this straighter, then thread is definitely the way you want to go, a nylon-based thread, because that will have a very soft, loose, floppy drape to it, as opposed to, look at the Fireline. The Fireline has got this suppleness to it, this stiffness to it. The stiffness will break down over time, but it takes a long time, and it will never be as soft and drapey as a thread will. It's going to have kind of this body to it. It was a big learning curve for me because I learned how to bead on thread before we ever started using Fireline in the bead industry. And making the move from thread to Fireline, I really resisted, because the first time I worked with Fireline, I was like, what the heck is this doing? It's like, you know, it's kind of sitting all the way over here, and I didn't know what to do with all this body it had. But one of the things about this extra stiffness it has is that it holds your tension better. So if you are a loose tension person, the Fireline is going to help you out holding that tension in better. Thread, you have to work a little harder at keeping tension in projects that are stitched with a thread, because it wants to slide a little bit more. It's just a little, it doesn't have as much tensile factor for it to kind of grab onto the beads the same way that the Fireline does. So fringing, anything that you want dangle and drape with, those are things that I go to thread for. If the thread is going to show quite a bit, then I go to thread for that, because then I can pick a color that is going to work better than just maybe the smoke, the white, or that green. The green is like a real neon green, which is really weird. So that's another reason to go to thread, is if the color of the thread is going to make a difference. The other thing is that depending on what beads you're using, if you're using transparent beads, that thread color will actually show and influence the color of the bead that you're using. So for instance, if you've got just a plain crystal bead that you're putting something through, if you put, you know, a smoke Fireline through it, it's going to pop a line of darkness through there. It's going to make that crystal color kind of come down in tone. Whereas if you used a white thread or a blue thread, you know, a white thread will give it more of a white, brighter kind of look. A blue thread would give it a blue tinge if it's just a plain crystal bead. So that thread can be used as a design element also. So those are reasons that I would use thread. Reasons I would use Fireline are, am I using bugle beads? Am I using crystals where my thread is coming directly across the edge of a crystal? The Fireline is going to resist the cutting action of bugles and crystals more than thread will, which isn't to say that there aren't exceptions to every rule. I have certainly used thread. Back in the day, I was using Nymo, so Nymo thread with a crystal bracelet, and it's held up just fine over time. There have also been times when it's cut the thread. So, you know, it's you pick your vice, right? But those are good reasons to use Fireline. If it's a project that you're having trouble holding tension on, you might want to switch to Fireline. So that's why there is no perfect answer of you should always use thread or you should always use Fireline. There's uses for both. And you just have to know the properties of each to be able to pick the right thread for your particular project that you're working on. So I hope this helps answer that question. I know it's kind of a non-answer, but it's a lot of information. So hopefully that will be helpful. Happy beading.